So let's have a look at Unit 2, Activity 3. The story that we are going to look at is Zoo, and it's by Edward Hoch. So, usual process. You're going to make your own copy. You're going to put it in your OLC folder. But I want you to note before you get started, I'm going to sneeze, that this assignment actually requires you to submit twice. So you're going to do part one, and then you're going to submit it for feedback. Once you get the feedback, you can do part two. Don't skip to part two before you get your feedback, and I'll try to stay on top of that one. Usually I can turn them around within a day. Okay, so let's have a look at narratives in general. So if we think about narrative, another word for a narrative is a story, right? So this is some of the content that was in the content area of the course that I've just copy and pasted over. But basically, it goes through what a narrative text is and basically talks about what you should expect when you're reading a narrative text. So what do we know about narratives? They can either be fiction or they could be nonfiction. So fiction tends to be something created from somebody's imagination, like Harry Potter. Nonfiction might be a story based on something that actually happened to somebody during their lifetime. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. So what do narratives have in common? When you're looking at a narrative story, just like when we looked at the newspaper report and we had things that we expected about the structure of a newspaper report, the same thing happens with a narrative. So there's certain things that we expect in a narrative. So usually you find some information out about characters, you think about the setting, there's some kind of conflict, and then there's a plot that's moving forward, and things sort of have a beginning, middle, and end. And we'll go over this a little bit below as well. So what do narratives do? They also include characters and dialogues that help to provide insight into a main character and move the story forward. And they're usually told in first person, so I, or third person, he, she, or they. So what is the main purpose of a narrative story? It's basically to entertain, or sometimes it can be about teaching you a lesson or revealing some sort of universal truth. What else? So when you're reading a narrative, it's important to do what? So it's important to think about what the author's message is. It's important to sort of make connections with your own feelings while you're reading it. And different to a newspaper article where you're just kind of pulling out what's the main idea and give me some supporting details. To go with that, just like you did with your information paragraphs. With a narrative, you're sort of looking at an overall theme of a story, and you're trying to find examples like using the plot and the characters and that sort of thing to help you. So we are going to look at this short story. It's called Zoo. Let me just scroll down, but we are going to look at it through a lens of this plot graph summary that's down below. So in a story, generally speaking, there are things that happen in the beginning, there are things that happen in the middle, and there are things that happen in the end of a story. So when I read a narrative, I expect to sort of see this loose structure happening with a narrative text or with a story. So in the beginning, generally I would find out who the main characters are. I might find out what the conflict is. So is it man versus man? Is it man versus nature, man versus himself, or man versus the supernatural? I would probably find out some information about the setting, which could change throughout the story. So when the story's set, where it's set, think about time and place. And then in the middle of the story, so as we get going, we are going to find out some information sort of that's moving the story along. So this is called the rising action of the story. So basically there are events that lead up to the turning point. And we'll talk about this as it refers to Zoo above. What else? So climax is the turning point. So whatever that moment is that you've sort of been anticipating a resolution to, the climax is a turning point when that sort of starts to be a little bit resolved. And then what happens following that? There are events in the falling action of the story. This story actually has a fairly long falling action, which is interesting, which also links over to the main theme behind this narrative. So, what are the events in the falling action? So, what happens after the conflict is resolved? And then, how does it get resolved? Generally happens in the end. And then sometimes you might pull out a theme behind the narrative just as a reflection in the end. So we are going to go through Zoo using the beginning, middle, and end, what we would expect in a story. You guys are going to write dot points. Some people last year chose to do their sentences here because you do actually have to pull it all together into a summary later. So it's up to you. But who are the main characters? You can either do dot points and say whoever the character's name is. What do you think the conflict is in terms of what's the complication that's happening? And your climax is your turning point. So we're going to fill in all those details. And then you guys are going to submit this part to me. Once you have submitted this part to me, you're going to get my feedback, and then you're going to put it into a paragraph. So you are going to say in the beginning, because we're talking about the story Zoo. So in the beginning of the story Zoo, da 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 da. In the middle, da 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 da. In the end, da da da. So we'll talk about that a little bit more after. So let's just try to get some information. We'll scroll back up, and we've got the story Zoo. We've got the author, and let's have a look at some of the pieces in the story. So the children were always good during the month of August, especially when it began to get near the 23rd. It was on this day that the great silver spaceship carrying Professor Hugo's interplanetary zoo settled down for its annual 6-hour visit to the Chicago area. So right away, we've been given quite a few things. So we've been given this character, Professor Hugo, which we could put down below. We have found out about this interplanetary zoo. So that's kind of exciting. And then what else? We know that it was the month of August, the Chicago area. So all of those things are pieces that you're finding out in the beginning of the story. So then, if we go back up, you can read a little bit more. So before day breaks, the crowds would form, long lines of children and adults both, each one clutching his or her dollar and waiting with wonderment to see what race of strange creatures the professor had brought this year. In the past, they had sometimes been treated to 3-legged creatures from Venus, or a tall, thin man from Mars, or even snake-like horrors from somewhere more distant. This year, as the great round ship settled down to Earth in the huge Tri-City parking lot just outside of Chicago, they watched in awe as the sides slowly slid up to reveal the familiar barred cages. In them were some wild breed of nightmare, small horse-like animals that moved with quick jerking motions and constantly chattering in a high-pitched tongue. The citizens of Earth clustered around as Professor Hugo's crew quickly collected the waiting dollars, and soon the good professor himself made an appearance wearing many-colored rainbow cape and top hat. "People of Earth," he called out on his microphone. The crowd's noise died down, and he continued. So we're just going to pause there. So if we scroll back down, we've got quite a bit of information for our beginning of our story. We should be able to fill in at least the start of the setting. Some of this will change. Our conflict. So what's the complication here? What's going on in this story? So it's all centering around this zoo, this interplanetary zoo that's coming. And so the conflict could be man versus supernatural, to sort of see how's it going to work out when these creatures from this other world come come to Earth and the Earthlings get to see them. So in terms of the rising action, we've got to think about what the turning point is next. So what are the events that happen before this turning point? So let's scroll back up. If we're thinking about the conflict being that people, just the people actually seeing the zoo, what happens once they do would be sort of around your climax or your turning point. So the citizens of Earth clustered around as Professor Hugo's crew quickly collected the waiting dollars, and soon the good professor made an appearance wearing his multicolored rainbow cape and top hat. Peoples of Earth, he called into his microphone. The crowd's noise died down. He continued, Peoples of Earth, this year you see a real treat for your single dollar. The little-known horse spider people of Khan, brought to you across 1,000,000 miles of space at great expense. Gather around, see them, study them, listen to them, tell your friends about them. But hurry, my ship can remain here for only 6 hours. So when you're thinking about the rising point, you've got to think about everything that happens until the point at which the people of Earth actually see the spider people. So let's keep moving. And the crowd slowly filed by at once, horrified and fascinated by these strange creatures that looked like horses but ran up the walls with their cages like spiders. This is certainly worth $1, one man remarked, hurrying away. I'm going home to get the wife. So we could see that the people were sort of safe when they finally got to see them. So the climax is them actually seeing the people, or the spider horse people of Khan. But the Earthlings are actually safe when this happens. All day long it went like that until tens of thousands of people filed by the barred cages set into the side of the spaceship. Then, as the 6-hour limit ran out, Professor Hugo once more took the microphone in hand. We must go now, but we will return next year on this date. And if you enjoyed our zoo this year, phone your friends in other cities about it. We will land in New York tomorrow, next week in London, Paris, Rome, Hong Kong, and Tokyo, and then on to other worlds. He waved farewell to them. And as the ship rose from the ground, the Earth's people agreed that this had been the very best zoo yet. Some 2 months and 3 planets later, so let's leave here and go down. I don't want to put all the information here for you guys. So the turning point, turning point would be when they actually see the people of Khan. And then what's everything that happens after? So the falling action events would be everything that happens, or the main things that happen after they've seen the people, the spider horse people. So how is the conflict resolved? So the conflict is the people of Earth actually seeing the spider people. So it's resolved when they see them and they're still safe. And then they can think about attending the zoo the next year and tell their friends about it. But there's a little bit more to this story. So let's have a look and try to think about what the theme of this story might be. So some 2 months and 3 planets later, the silver ship of Professor Hugo settled at last into the familiar jagged rocks of Khan. The queer horse spider creatures filed quickly out of their cages. Professor Hugo was there to say a few parting words, and they scurried away in 100 different directions, seeking their homes among the rocks. In one, the she creature was happy to see the return of her mate and offspring. She babbled a greeting in a strange tongue and hurried to embrace them. It was a long time you were gone. Was it good? And the creature nodded. The little one enjoyed it especially. We visited 8 worlds and saw many things. The little one ran up one wall of the cave. On the place called Earth, it was the best. The creatures wear garments over skins and walk on two legs. But isn't it dangerous? Asked the shriek creature. No, her mate answered. There are bars to protect us from them. We remain right in the ship. Next time you must come with us. It is well worth the 19 comics it costs. And the little one nodded. It was the very best zoo ever. So the interesting part of this story sort of happens, I think, at the end. So the conflict's resolved. The people of Earth have actually seen the zoo. But what ends up happening? And what's sort of the theme behind this narrative? So the people of Khan actually think they're paying to go see a zoo, and they're visiting all the different worlds. But the people of Earth think they're going to see a zoo. So it's kind of this interesting twist on, things aren't always quite what they seem. Because when we start the story, we think that the people of Earth are going to the zoo, but in reality, it's the people of Khan that are going to the zoo as well. So it's sort of an interesting story and the flip that way. So what I want you guys to do is to go through, do your dot points for part 1, and then you are going to submit that to me, to the assignment box that relates to it. And then you are going to do the summary part. So I'm going to do a second video for that, just so that I'm not rambling too much.